insight on climate change and global warming. This whole night's going to be about that. It's kind of exciting. And we're here. I'm going to talk a little bit, and Hari's going to talk, and then we're going to have a Q&A that I'm going to do, and then you guys can ask questions, so it'll be like a real program, sort of. What we're talking about tonight is one of the biggest issues facing our planet. I'm here to interview our ECDC board member, Hari Lamba. As you can see, he's an author of many books on the important topic of climate change and global warming. And those will be available to you in the back with a contribution bucket out there. Each one's a different book. And I'll show them a little later to you so that you can get into this. Again, I'll give a brief introduction here, and then we'll get to the interview. I wanted to talk about the bio of Hari first, though. He's quite an impressive guy. He's an engineer, a public servant, an author who recently moved to the Bay Area from Chicago. And he's been dedicated to public service his whole life, and, in quotes, solving the global ecological and economic crisis we face in the country and the world. So that's a pretty big task here. He was born to a Sikh army family in India and migrated to the United States in 1970 after receiving his bachelor's degree in aeronautical engineering and a PhD degree in engineering mechanics at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And for his 40 years of work, he worked as an engineer and a corporate manager for a company that designed and sold diesel locomotives worldwide. And he retired, in quotes, in 2016. Since his retirement, he's been an active volunteer in the Democratic Party, the Clean Power team of the Sierra Club. He organized and coordinated an informal group in Chicago called the Earth Summit Network that educated the public about the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, which was held in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. He and his wife moved to the Bay Area to be near their kids, who now live in Albany, and he is now the disaster preparedness coordinator in his local neighborhood in East Richmond Heights, and he's the author of 5 books. I'm going to hold them up right now so that you see them, because we may refer to them as we go here. The oldest one here is called Rethinking Progress Towards a Creative Transformation of Global Society. There's a personal climate change handbook, which is my favorite because it's got big type in it. It's really good. It's really good. His personal climate change handbook. Do I have that?
Yeah, that was the green one.
Oh, the green one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The History of Our Earth is this next one, which is really fun for kids and to sit around and read. And then Rejuvenating America, which we'll talk about a little later, as a direct result of who got elected, I think, to the presidency. So I'm going to just talk just a couple minutes here before Hari gets into some technical stuff, just to give some context to what we're talking about. You all know this. It's no secret to any of us, to the American public, to the world public, that it's a challenge of our lifetime because of the science and because of the political battles that we have to carry on. And it remains a rocky and political road in dealing with climate change in our country, primarily because environmental regulation costs money, and our response to it impacts industries, energy, oil, and auto that vote Republican, so the Democratic Club. In the recent past, Congress failed to pass a national cap-and-trade bill to respond to greenhouse gas emissions, and that's when President Obama had both Democratic houses in the legislature, and that led him to move on to address by himself in the EPA and in the Clean Air Act some issues dealing with coal, and to make some executive directives that he was criticized for. In California, we've been the most active state in addressing greenhouse gases and emissions with our own cap-and-trade law, some anti-carbon regulations, and challenging goals that we have for renewable energy. So we're doing okay in California, and now, as we all know, with the election of Donald Trump, it was a major setback for all environmental regulations, and climate change important election coming up in 2020. And finally, I just wanted to show there's no scarcity of media on climate change, that it's our job to keep working toward it. The Sierra Club recently had its climate change adaptation issue out, talking about how we can adapt in this world, this crazy world that we have. The New York Times had a whole section called "This is Our Reality Now." Big graphs like Ari has over here. We have a whole, the New Deal. We're going to talk a little bit probably about the Green New Deal here tonight in the New York Times. Interestingly, last week, Feinstein was dismissive of kids' plea for Green Deal here, which is an interesting story. And finally, my favorite thing was this Sunday review in the New York Times, where why can't rich people save winter? They like to ski, but are they paying and moving toward? So Hari, I'd like you to introduce yourself and give a little intro, and then we'll come back and sit down and we'll talk. I'll do a couple of questions with you.
All right. Thank you, Paul. I was just going to try and make this as interesting and fun as possible. I want to share with you the progression of my thinking and how I came to write the books I did. Please feel free to take as many copies of the books as you want. They are free. Certainly, if you make a donation, I'm going to recycle the money to use it for the same purposes. But the books are going to be very informative and fun for you. And so please take the books. The ones in front have already been signed. The ones at the back need to be signed. So in case you need them to be signed after the signatures ones run out, then I can sign those also. I want to thank ECDC for having given me a place that I've started feeling more at home with, and you folks have been very receptive. I know I've made some initiatives, and I most probably bugged you guys quite a bit in terms of the 2 resolutions and so forth, but thank you very much for being receptive. I want to thank, India was good to me. I grew up as a young man, and then I migrated in 1970. America has been really good to me, and I just wanted to give back to America. The books provide my best understanding of the issues, but what I'm going to try and do also is I have established a website called rejuvenate-america.com, and the website has a free Rejuvenate guide, 20-page you can download, and it provides you information about the Rejuvenating America book. But I plan to use the website to as a blog and also to gather the best ideas that people can give, so that ideas that I'm proposing can be refined or revised or modified in order to have the best things available. Also, I'll be putting educational files, which will be text and videos for people's education on such subjects as defense, subjects as trade, healthcare, and things like that, so that we get away from this thing where politicians are able to make wild statements and get away with a lot of things and the general public not being educated on those issues is just as to nod and go along. So anyways, I just wanted to add a little plug for what I plan to do. My motivation here is not to be rich and famous. I know I have maybe another 20 years left for my life, and I just wanted to make it good for, make our communities, the US and our planet a better place. I'm going to talk a little bit about the fact that we are at a stage where I think we need to look at several things. We need to look at ourselves as a species. We need to look at our nation, the core principles and the things that got things, and we need to look at what our ecology things are, our relationship to nature. And so we really had a fundamental stage. I'll talk about that after your first question. We are a part of nature. We are mammals, and I'll get into that. My whole objective is to make things better. In climate, I think we can solve it, but we need to get moving, and I'll talk to that fact that we can do it, but we've got to get moving right away. We can't delay any further. As far as our national political situation is, I think that we have, when I came to the country, I was really amazed with the way local government worked, how well it worked. I was very well received. The entire university set up, the way research was done, the way National Science Foundation functioned, everything was beautiful. The only thing is, while I was in India and in the US, I realized that while modern civilization, with all its high technology and all its tremendous achievements, there was something that was going wrong. And the two things that were going wrong I saw, which made me scratch my head, were the environmental destruction that was going on. Even in the 1960s, when I was in India, I could see it. And the people in India and here, there's a certain class of people who are getting poorer. And why were they getting poorer? Large numbers of people, millions, hundreds of millions of them, while they were supposed to be getting better. And so I started to scratch my head, and I'll share my thinking with you. That's where I kind of changed my thinking and started to question. And that's where a lot of ideas came up, and I'll talk about those ideas. In each stage, I'll try and give you the best description of what I have in the book and in the books that I've written, so that you can go back and read them, hopefully at your own leisure. There'll be books that will help you go to sleep, if you're having trouble falling asleep. Anyways, that's kind of where I am right now, and I'm ready.
Well, let's get to
questions.
That. Let's get to that then. First, let's talk about your books at first here. When did your writing begin, and why was climate change right away one of your first topics that you began writing about?
I'm just going to back here a little bit as about something I was starting to talk about and the change in my thinking. So I was looking at all this thing going on. I was an engineer. We had something called the Kanpur Indo-American Program in the Institute of Technology. I was in India. The United States was helping that institution. We had all the high-tech equipment in the world. We had beautiful laboratories. I could see all the technology, and it was beautiful. But at the same time, when I looked in the other direction, I could see the problems. And while I could see certain segments of society in India and abroad flourishing, there was a problem. So then I was scratching my head and I was looking for alternatives. I don't know if any of you folks ever happened to read Small is Beautiful, Schumacher. I came across Schumacher in about close to 1980. And I read that book and I said, hey, this is a book that makes you think about alternatives. We don't always have to take what's being handed down to us as quote-unquote modern civilization as being the gospel truth. We need to question it. And the title was Small is Beautiful, Economics as if People Mattered. Economics as if people mattered. I thought economics was supposed to be for the benefit of people. And he said no. The way economics has been functioned is not for the benefit of the majority of the people. You need to redefine economic principle. And a lot of appropriate technology, you might have heard about appropriate technology for the villages, where villagers could do innovation by themselves and come up with these small devices so they could process their agricultural products and, anyway, appropriate technology kind of came about, so I went around and educated myself on that. But he pointed out to me, another gentleman, that as you can see, there's a picture of Mahatma Gandhi there. So I started reading Gandhi's books. And Gandhi presented a whole different way in which India should have developed. The way India developed was they imported these large steel plants, some from the Soviet Union, some from the other places, these big, huge factories, and they got in debt. But only 10 or 20 million of the 300 million people were being involved. The other 280 million people were being neglected. And they weren't being involved, they weren't getting better employment. So Gandhi talked about a lot of alternatives, social, political. They haven't received a lot of publicity because he's been stereotyped all over the place. But he talked about peace issues, how you can achieve genuine peace, nationally and internationally. But anyway, so that's when I started thinking. But it was when I was doing all this thinking, I started reading and writing. And then come 1992, I was in Chicago, and there was this Earth Summit, the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, organized by a great Canadian called Maurice Strong. And Maurice Strong had put together this international conference in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. 1991 was all the lead up to it. I started talking to all the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, and they started talking about climate change. I said, what's climate change? Well, I got educated a little bit on climate change. I organized an Earth Summit network, about a dozen organizations of about 20 other people, and we had a dozen events. At that time in 1991, if you talked about climate change, you were thought of as a kook. You really were. I mean, what kind of a strange animal are you? But then I got to realize that we were negotiating a treaty on global warming and biodiversity, and then there was another Agenda 21, which was supposed to provide an agenda for the 21st century. And so we started putting pressure on the senior Bush administration to be more flexible at the global warming talks and sign the treaty. I don't know whether it was because of our pressure, but he did. The US did sign the treaty. But signing a treaty didn't do anything. So at that time I was going around and I was talking about...
It's your first book, then you're getting to
So
pull together facts for your first book.
Right.
And I just wanted to say on Small is Beautiful, Jerry Brown, our governor, read that book too, as you recall, in his first term and created an Office of Appropriate Technology.
Okay.
I happen to work in that office, so just to let you know. I mean,
Wow.
ironically.
Wow.
And so that was in the 70s.
Oh,
In the
okay.
70s.
Right.
So now we're getting to the 90s and you're
Right.
pulling this together. Okay.
So I was going around giving talks on global warming and I didn't understand the hell what I was talking about. And so I started to read and write. And I was working full time, so every time I went traveled, I was reading, I was writing, I was reading, I was writing. And what I basically put together in this book, Betty, is a comprehensive description of the ecological crisis. The Ecological Crisis Global, this book is a really good book because it tells you the situation we face globally as a civilization. The ecological crisis, the developmental crisis, you know, Bernie is going on talking about this 1% and the 99% suffering while the 1%. Well, the development crisis was unfolding through the world through the decades for a long time. And the development crisis is the degradation in the economic and conditions of hundreds of millions of people globally. The biography of the planet, which means what happened 4.6 billion years, and I'll talk in one of my books, so I'll leave it to that later as to what the planet did for us and how we've gotten to this beautiful planet that we have now.
Can we get to this next book? Because you were very technical in this book, and then you got to a very personal...
I just want to say one more thing.
Sure.
In this particular book, I start to address some of the fundamentals of what we need to be as a human species. You know, we are Homo sapiens, supposed to be the wise species. The economic principles call us Homo economicus. We are the ones that are meant for only participating in economic benefits for our own benefit, and dominating nature, extracting from nature the most we can, etc., etc. And those principles, economic principles, have led to a lot of destructive activity. We need at this stage to become Homo ecologicus. We need a transition of the way we view ourselves, and as a species we need to be stewards, and we can produce a really beautiful planet. We can be better for ourselves, better for the rest of nature, better for our planet. And we can have a good life that be good for all. But we need to do that. And there's something that Schumacher talked about in his book, was the difference between crematistics and oikonomia. Oikonomia is the principles of economics. Crematistics is what Homo economicus belongs to. It is make profit and extraction and domination of nature, domination of other people. You base your economics on that. And Homo ecologicus is oikonomia. Oikonomia is the root of the word economics. And so we need to study, and I define here the difference between crematistics and oikonomia. But in this book, I have chapter after chapter described solutions to the ecology crisis, the climate crisis, how human activities need to change, why we need more fundamental forms of democracy, the quality of our democracy. I'll talk about when I talk about the US national, I'll talk about the quality of democracy. How do you know we have a good democracy? And then education. We should be investing in people because that's the real wealth of a nation. The nation that came up after World War II were the ones that had an educated population. They're the ones that came up fast. The other nations we helped, they didn't come up because they didn't have an educated population. So our brains are our biggest wealth. And that wealth is being discouraged. And so I'm just going to...
And then this leads to your guidebook, which tells us how to get there, right? Personally?
Yeah, no, this is the Personal Climate Change Handbook.
Right.
Before I talk that book, can I talk about just one other book that's a real fun book, which I did just before that?
Sure.
Is a poem.
Is that the poem book?
A book of 30 of my
two books of
poems.
poetry here, yeah.
So when I was in Downers Grove, I had a beautiful park across the street. I used to go walking and biking in the park, and when I would be walking and biking in the park, a poem would strike me. It says, the birds are chirping, the winds are blowing, and so I think of a poem, and I'd come home and I'd scratch it down, and then I'd flesh it out. And so what this book is about is it's appreciation of the beauty of nature, appreciation of the beauty of our planet, and the poems stir you towards the other book was for the head. The other book was for the head. This one was for the head. It's a lot of heavy reading. This book was for the heart. And it's a tradition that's called verse journalism. Verse journalism is poetry with a purpose. And so that is what I thought, well, maybe I can get to people through people's hearts. If people are not willing to think about it, maybe they start identifying with nature and the planet and so forth and feel an identity with it, then maybe they might be another key to their heart. So,
and he's promised to read a couple poems at the very end.
At the end.
Okay. So now talk about the handbook that tells us how to be good stewards.
right.
And then we'll get to some policy issues here after your book and stuff.
The thing that about, so I was, after I wrote my book, published in 2005, I was going, for about a decade, I give talks in an organization called India Development Coalition of America. I used to organize a panel and give a talk on global warming. was giving it for about 10 years. In October, the annual conference, and on Earth Day. So I used to organize a panel of 3 or 4 speakers. I used to be one of the speakers. So I was talking about problems and solutions for global warming. But people said, yeah, we come for the conference and it kind of passes through us. We don't really, understand what's going on. So can you please summarize it? So what I did, I said, okay, I'm going to give you a handbook. What can I do in my personal life? And what can I do in my local, state, national, and global lives in order to apply the pressure? Because I can do a certain amount in my own life. It also affects me in my thinking, modifies my own thinking. And so I do what I can, and then I apply. But this is a very good summary of the way the situation was as of 2016, just before the 2016 election. It most probably needs to get modified because Trump has now come and he's given us the Great Leap backwards. You know, we had Mao with a Great Leap forward. With Trump, we have the Great Leap backwards, and he's falling on his butt. And
isn't this book, this is your response to that?
That's the national political one, but let me talk a little bit more about this one. This one, I think, is a website which is Nature Conservancy. You need to go and evaluate your own carbon footprint. The carbon footprint, the average carbon footprint of the United States is 53 per person, tons of carbon per year, average. Mine, I did it for the Lamba family, and mine came to be 36 because I had solar panels, I used efficient appliances, and I had a Prius. The average for the world is 11. We need a world, at that time we were saying 50% reduction, so the world needed to get down to an average of 5. We were talking about, reducing our emissions by about 50% at that time, over quite a few decades actually at that time. But anyway, do that, and then look at the things that you can do locally, state-wise, nationally, and globally. Because global warming is a global issue. And when I talk about the thing, what I can do is I can talk a little bit in a little more detail on the global warming issue.
Right, a little more about
and I can get back to that
good.
in terms of the solutions.
But can you talk about your response to Trump in this book a little bit? And why you came up with that?
Okay. Before I get to that, can I just do one more book? Which is a really fun book called...
Sure.
It's this one.
The history, yes, this is a good one.
The History of Our Earth. It's chapter 2 in my
It's a
book.
poetry book too, right?
Yeah, this was actually book 2. I took one poem out of that, it was the History of Our Earth. I fleshed it out, I put poems, my couplets on one side I was helped by Pat Woodward of DePaul University, the Catholic University in DePaul, and he and she helped me with the poems. And my brother in India did the watercolors. And so I went over 4.6 billion years of what the planet has gone through. We started with 4.6 billion years ago as a molten ball. The protoplanetary disk, when we were formed, was a molten ball. The disk, the planet was a molten ball. And how did we form the oceans? How did we form the oceans? Through the evaporation and condensation of water. How did we form the crust? How did single-cell life come about in the oceans? We had no oxygen. From oxygen, we got photosynthesis. The photosynthesis bacteria gave us our oxygen. Even today, the oxygen that we've been breathing is being given by life. If they were not contributing oxygen today, we won't have oxygen to breathe. The rest of life wouldn't, if they didn't. When oxygen got to 7% of what it is today, the ozone layer formed. There could be no life on land. And when the ozone layer formed, it cut down the ultraviolet light. And when the ultraviolet light got cut down is when life was formed on land, and life migrated from the sea. The coral reefs were the rainforests of where life was exploded in the sea, and then it moved to land because the ozone layer was there, and then life evolved. The two big things I want to leave you with just with this book is somewhere along later on it shows you how fossils that were formed because of dead animals sank to the bottom of the sea, and the fossil fuels were formed, which we call oil or petroleum. Took a few 100 million years for that to happen, and the planet cooled. Carbon dioxide was taken out of the atmosphere. Then a few 100 million years was the Carboniferous period. The Carboniferous period gave us our coal, and that's where more carbon dioxide was taken. And when the Earth finally cooled, a few million years ago, we got the ice ages. And when the last ice age lifted 10,000 years ago is where civilization as we know it. We are, geologically speaking, in the period, would anyone know which period we are in right now? We are in the Holocene interglacial period. We are between two glacial periods. And the way the glacial periods form is, the Earth's axis is at an angle, right? It gives us our seasons. Well, the Earth's axis actually precesses like a top. Every big circle is about 130,000 years. It gives us a maxi ice age. And that's when the Neanderthals were there in Europe. And last time it lifted was 10,000 years ago. If it wasn't for global warming, we were going into another glacial period 10,000 years from now. But the beauty of this is, the beauty of the planet is what it's given us. Our oxygen, it's given us our protections, it's given us a magnetic field that protects us from solar wind. And we see it as aurora borealis. And it protects us from. So anyways, this is the history of the Earth, and we are taking within a few centuries, and we have crashed this beautiful planet.
And it's a great book to read with kids.
It's a beautiful book. I would say,
beginning to end.
Give it to your kids and grandkids.
Yeah.
Ask them to read it. Ask them. I designed this so that they could recite it in school and show the pictures and recite the poem. And it's a great book as a Christmas gift and as a gift to other people.
But toward the end, it's getting dirtier in here, so we got to do something about that, right?
Yeah, and so the last poem is a very hopeful one.
Hopeful.
That we'll change our ways, etc., and we'll green the planet.
So tell us about the Trump vote now, so we can get to some policy issues, and then we can ask
Yeah,
questions.
I'll come to this, and then I'd like to talk about global
Yeah.
warming.
I mean, were you mad when you wrote this book? Because if you guys read the first few pages, he's mad about Trump. And so I want to hear some of that mad come out here.
Yeah. The national political crisis that we face is quite profound. The only time I first started to scratch my head, as a young grad student, as a young Sikh grad student with a turban walking around Cabana campus, my first picture was where within a week of coming, I'd run upstairs to one of the engineering buildings, and all of a sudden, this guy told me, hey, you better stay upstairs. I was going to come down. And guess what was happening? The National Guard was coming down Wright Street, and students were going helter-skelter. This was 1970. It was just the tail end of the protests for the Vietnam War. And so I kind of scratched my head, and then I forgot about it. The next time I scratched my head, I was very appreciative of the political system and the way it functioned, how efficiently. You didn't require, you gave a check and nobody even asked you for an ID. That was the period, 1970, and the research, the technology, NSF, everything, NASA, the moon program, everything was good. The The other time I scratched my head was when I was exposed to the Pentagon Papers. And the Pentagon Papers, when I read that, it really made me scratch my head. Which told me that what politicians were saying in public was not necessarily what they were doing in private. This has been, and I think that's been an issue. Anyway, I forgot about that. Then I went through all of this Schumacher and Gandhi and writing the books and all that. And well, come to Bush's time, again, that was a tough time, I think. Every time I would go north of the border to Canada, they would ask me, why did you re-elect Bush the second time? But anyways, I think still things were bad, but I think the Iraq war was a big, humongous mistake. But anyways, come to 2016, and things really turned, I think, very sour for our nation, and I have come to regard this as my nation. I want to contribute to its well-being. I think it can contribute to its own well-being and to the well-being of the world. But we need to get our act together. What has happened is that a populist leader has come along and has fooled us into thinking that he's doing good things for us, whereas he has fooled us and divided us. There's been enormous, so what I basically started to do was I started to read and write, and the more I analyzed. So this book, what it does is it has four parts to it, but the four parts to this book are initially the dangers posed by Trump and why it is fascist in nature. The attacks on democracy, attacks on the press, the language of violence, etc., etc. And he has encouraged a whole bunch of people who are going to be troubling us for a long time. We have to nip this in the bud. The last time we had that bad a situation was the Great Depression, and we had someone like FDR come along and really do something good for the people. We had the Works Progress Administration, we had lots of good, we had a New Deal and all that, and saved us from the extremes of communism and fascism. He really saved us from both the extremes and took us down the center path by giving the common American something to hold on to. But anyways.
And Ari, I just want to say, what scares me is how long it's taken to get a Clean Air Act, a Clean Water Act, preserve our national parks, and how quickly it is for him to dismantle all of those things by putting horrible people in that are on the opposite side. So we're way back. We're already it takes a long time to get there, and then a short time to destruct all the stuff.
Right, absolutely. And so the next part is the movements that have come out. You have these enormous marches. I have participated in the Women's March. I have participated in the Immigration March. I participated in the Climate March in Chicago, and I've done it here too. These marches are a tremendous number of people, but the Women's March, the women and supporters of women's rights need to get organized politically. Then there's the gun control stuff. All these movements need to come together. They just shouldn't be fighting all by themselves. So that's point number two. The third part is the visions. I'm not the sole repository of wisdom, and that's why I have the website to try and gather the best ideas. But I have put together in this book the visions. I think we need to take America to a point where we are so good and things are so healthy and so good that we never sink that low, because we're coming along reasonably good, and we've sunk to a new low. We need to get up to a point where we are so good, our democracy is so strong, we strengthen our democracy so much, we strengthen our diversity so much, we strengthen our ecological principles so much, that we never, even if we have some small valleys occurring in our nation, we don't ever get down to where we are today. So, in order to have visions, what I did was I put together the visions of the traditional Democratic Party, the women's rights, women's right to choose, minority rights and so forth, and other things that socially are traditional for the Democratic Party and for the economics and for social security and so forth, Medicare and minimum wage and so forth. I added progressive visions. I found no place of vision for our Native Americans, for our tribal nations. I found it on Bernie's website. So I summarized that and put it in here. Then you know that I had been talking about jobs and economy quite a bit. And I was saying, hey, this is not an issue that we should be leaving to the Republicans. And so I have a chart. I wish I could have showed you more charts. But we have an economic system. The Republicans claim that they are the magic wand holders of investment and finance and industry. And boy, these Democrats, all they know is to tax and spend, and then all they do. And so we are, most of the time, talking about Social Security, we're talking about all the safety benefits, safety nets. Well, this monster economic system is all going on its merry way. It's creating the climate crisis. It's empowering people. It's creating these tremendous profits. So what I said was we need a 4-point thing on jobs and economy. When I was doing this book, I studied in great detail how societies develop, how the United States became rich, the processes by which it became rich, the processes by which Japan came up, command capitalism, and how the other Asian tigers learned from them and came up also to become modern nations. So what are the processes? It was industrial policy. We need a strong industrial policy for having pro-employment, pro-environment industries. The fourth part of that.
Are you talking about Democrats?
Democrats we need to be the party of business.
And you said this at your very first meeting that you came to in this.
Right. We need to be the proper. Right. We need that was the resolution.
I remember you standing up and saying. Someone just said the other day that I heard is that Democrats tend to want to take up all their time on how to divide up the pie, and Republicans, and not enough time to grow the pie. And is that
so? Yeah.
We need to be part of that process and discussion as well on how we grow is the issue.
So what we need is they take that whole process and then they appropriate 90% of the benefits, and only 10% of the benefits come to the rest of the people. And we need to take charge of this monster economic system, and we need to be the party of businessmen, a business that is pro-employment, is ethical, is pro-environment, it treats its workers properly, has workplace democracy. So there's several ideas in terms of that we need. We need tax reform for human capital investment. It's training, education, payroll tax reduction, so you can the business can hire more people. We need that type of tax reform, not the kind that Trump has given. We need tax reform. We need a good program for depressed communities. Why? You look at CNN and cities are blue and everything else is red. Come on. We've forgotten rural America and small town America. We need, those people are suffering. We need strong programs. I call it local production for local use. You can't do it by reviving coal. You need local production for local use, which is what Schumacher talked about also. Local production for local use. And so that would help them. Then we need an entire range of activities for sustainability. Sustainability tells us like, oh, we got to do things so that somehow the environment and the planet can sustain it. I think sustainability is a moderate term. We need to rejuvenate things. We need to transform our entire economic system so that everything that we do is transformed for climate change.
Hari, what do you think of the new governor and what California can do?
Yeah, for
Are we
California-
doing all that we can do? I know that we're gonna be the example outside of the Trump world of continuing on.
I think that California, what I wanted to point out was in 1990, they said in the Kyoto Protocol in 1997, they said, which was the first time the world was actually supposed to do something in action for climate change. It was 1997, although the treaty got signed in 92. Kyoto Protocol said all the rich nations, category 1 nations and index 2 nations, reduce your carbon emissions to the 1990 levels by a certain year. California's and a few Scandinavian nations are the only ones who've done it. California was, at 1990, was 400 million tons of carbon emissions. Compared to the 36,000 million tons, it was not a big number. It was, we went up to about 440, and even as of last year, we were down to 400. So we actually met our goals, but we are still up at 400. And the big challenge, I think, Governor Newsom is, I think, starting to do all the right things. But there's two big challenges I think that we face. And when I talk about what I'd like to come back to is the solutions to the climate crisis. But the two big things for California, I think, are become apparent. See, electricity is not a problem. You can produce all the electricity we need with solar and wind. So SB 100, which got passed last year, Senate Bill 100, basically says that by 2045 we'll be 100% renewable. And we can do it with solar and wind and maybe geothermal. That's doable. The main problem, there's two problems that occur. One is that electricity is produced at a time when the consumer is not being produced, say, at night when consumers need it. So that's one issue. And the second issue is becomes apparent as soon as you get onto the highway. We have 5 or 6 lanes of fossil fuel cars. And even though efficiency, California was the big leader and we drove efficiency standards, CAFE. We drove CAFE. And so the nation adopted these high efficiency standards and the entire, all the auto manufacturers started designing cars more efficient, become more and more efficient. But the miles driven are swapping that out. People are driving a lot more. So those two issues are the issues that I'll address that I think California has to do. And then the third issue is wildfires. I think we need to be organizing every day for the next disaster. Right now, we need to be, just as soon as our rains are over, we need to be in the forest areas, listen to the experts who tell us what to do, and be preparing our forest areas for the next season of forest fires, so that when the firefighters get there, they have a much easier time controlling the fires. And to some extent, we need another two things, which I'll also talk about in climate change solutions, is we need to reforest. But reforest plantation style that can generate jobs. And then we need coastal ecosystems because we're going to get these massive storms because of global warming. We need global ecosystems. The Gulf area and the East Coast probably need it a lot more
Hari,
severely than us, but California.
I want to get back to the Washington versus California, because we may lose the CAFE standard issue with the president. Right. He's battling our ability to have separate standards for our emissions. How do we take on that battle with Washington and the Trump and California? How do we deal with this?
Right. Well,
and let's throw this out there too, is the Green New Deal.
Yeah.
The way, have you looked into that yet and seen it is aspirational, but there's a lot to be.
Can I talk about the two?
Well, answer this question first,
okay.
then you can talk.
All right.
And then any other questions? We'll get to questions from you guys too soon here.
The things that are out there today are the Green New Deal, because most folks must have heard of the Green New Deal. Green New Deal basically is in a House resolution. 109 has been submitted to the Congress. The Green New Deal, House Resolution 109, basically is a good statement of aspirations and principles. What it basically says is what my Category 4 strategy was for rejuvenation. Was you solve climate change while you create jobs in all these new activities. Okay? That's what the Green New Deal is about. They have taken the New Deal language from FDR so that this continuous impoverishment of significant portions of the American population is halted, and we not only solve climate change, because as you saw, in France, if you try and impose a carbon tax, which is what France tried to do, you had the Yellow Vests come out and they were in the streets rioting, and he had to back up. You have Brexit has occurred somewhat because of that. So you really need a new deal for the common folks, because otherwise, and it's a good idea to put a carbon tax and to compensate the folks so that they don't feel the pinch, and the common folks get something to relieve the pain of the carbon tax. But we also need to invest. I'll talk about research and development we need to do in new areas that will help us solve climate change. So we need to take some of that money, Betty, and also invest it in these new activities that will help us solve climate change.
I want to ask you a tough question, because your books talk about human beings, Homo sapiens, being on this earth, being caring about this earth, and then anytime we're asked to do something tough, like a carbon tax or a gas tax, human beings don't want to do it.
Right.
We're basically selfish. Look at the French, the riots about a tax on carbon, on gas. How do we get over that hump? I mean, there's a lot of things we should be doing and lists of things, but human beings, when resources get tight, resist. And we're at that point now where people are resisting working against climate change.
Yeah. Here's where I would like to take a little break in the sense of different climate change. People talk about solutions as being gloom and doom. Oh, we're going to have to give this up, give that up, give that up. We can create, with climate change solutions, with our ecosystem, we can create. We've been destroying our planet for quite some time. We've been trashing it. We've got a lot of the ecological crisis. Radioactive waste is still unsolved. Toxic waste is still unsolved. Deforestation is going, desertification is going on. While we're in this meeting, we'll have lost 3 species. So biodiversity is getting destroyed. So all of that is going on. But what climate change is our first chance of creating a more beautiful planet, a healthier planet, restoring the productive capacity of nature and our planet, and giving ourselves a healthy life for everyone, rather than only for the few. What is happening is that the pain gets transferred to the poor folks, and the benefits of everything go to the rich folks. So you can't impose pain, and you can't say to the poor man, oh, you know, I'm fighting against a carbon tax. Well, he's living from hand to mouth to begin with, and you're imposing a carbon tax on him.
But you do have a guidebook about what everybody should be doing, right? And shouldn't everybody be taking some of the, everybody should
Sure.
chip in on this?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. Now can I talk
So
about...
5 more minutes, you talk about this, and then we'll open this up to other questions from the audience, okay? 5 more minutes.
Guys, we've run out of time.
No, you've got 5 more minutes here.
Okay, 1992, we've got 5 more minutes. Yeah, we're running out of time otherwise too. In 1992, when we were at a certain point, if we had been doing reducing our carbon emissions 2% a year, in 28 years, we would be down 56%. We wouldn't have a problem if we had done it gradually. If we had listened in 1992, we didn't. Well, we cut down on our merry way. We were at A, which is 350 parts per million. And so anyway, here's carbon dioxide, A, B, C, D. This is where we are today. All right? Now, the big thing that I kept saying in the decade when I kept giving my talks was, if you start doing your carbon emissions, you can actually go to a point where you can have fossil fuel emissions, a high level of fossil fuel emissions you can live with. Why? Because the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is low. And you've reduced it a little bit so that you're good enough. And you could have had a lot of fossil fuel emissions. Now the reason why we run out of time in the 5th report, I talk about 3 or 4 of those IPCC reports in that book. Well, the 5th report, they say you've run out of time. If you want to limit your temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is D, you got to reduce your carbon emissions by 50% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. Okay? And so that means that we got to do something about our fossil fuel cars. I have a lot of innovative ideas about what we do with our fossil fuel cars. Have solar highways, solar panels along our highways. And there's another big solution that we can do. The 2 problems, remember I talked about? The fact that solar and wind produce electricity at a time when consumers produce electricity at a time. Right now we need electricity, but there's no solar or wind, right? Well, you can either store it in batteries or you can have it in what I call storage fuels. Storage fuels are like hydrogen, ammonia, and aluminum. You produce those storage fuels at a time with surplus solar and wind energy, and you then use that and you open these gas stations. But the gas stations are not selling gasoline. They are either solar stations for charging your batteries, or they're hydrogen. You stock up on hydrogen or ammonia or on aluminum. And aluminum, anyway, so these storage fuels are what we need the R&D for. We need research and development on these storage fuels so that we can help to transition. Otherwise, the only other alternative is to electrify our highways. Means some of the crazy ideas that I could come up with are basically like, you have, the carpool lane, you'd have a catenary. And so you have an electric car that has a small battery system and it reaches up and draws on electricity, like a tram does. And you have your highway trucks, they do the same thing in your right lane. And then when you have a small battery system, when you disconnect, you go home on the battery system. Anyways, we need to come up with some very significant solutions for transportation. That's where our challenge is. And in the process, in each one of those industries, we can be generating a lot of jobs.
High-speed rail.
Okay, I think transportation, one of the things I talk about is integrated transportation. That means you should be able to walk to, let's say, a train station or a bus, take a local train, take a high-speed train, and you should be able to travel long distances. Because if you go and try and do your carbon footprint, a few airline trips, and you've blown your carbon footprint. And the rich people are the ones who benefit. People like us who can afford to travel by air, or the rich people who are richer than me can afford to travel by air, but they are the ones who, so air travel and shipping also need to be included besides all the nations. need to be included in this picture. You know? Solution-wise, before we open up for questions, here's my pitch for what we really need to do. We need to come up with solutions. So I'm in the process of writing another book, which is called a Global Climate Action Plan, which is not only what the US needs to do, what we need to do globally. The US has got to get off its high horse and stop talking down on United Nations type organization. We need an effective, we need a plan, and we need a global organization that helps the whole world transition. Because the CO2 that's in the atmosphere, that's right here, it could have been produced in India or in China. It's global. We solved California's problem, and even California comes down to zero emissions. It still doesn't do the trick, it's only 400 million tons. So, we need solutions, we need political solutions at the national level, we need HR 7173 is going to get us part of the way, the carbon tax, that's going to get us part of the way. We need media actions. We need movements and organizations need to come together. You can think of this as the same way as a national political crisis too, where we have visions and you have all of this. And then we need personal action, like personal and local. We need our own environmental committee. We need to be doing something in the city. We need to be doing things and applying pressure locally. The other pitch I want to make is, I was also, besides all these other things, people also told me, how do you do something? You just talk all the time. Can you please do something? So besides making the home efficient, what I did was I basically became a solar salesperson while I was in Illinois. I'm getting solar panels for my house. Here's the thing. If you give me $5,000 today, let me ask you a question. What's the best you can expect with $5,000 at a bank or even if an investment broker invested it for you? 5-6%. Okay? You give me $5,000, I'll give you 30%, $1,500 back the first year. And if your electric bill is $500 a year, I'll give you tax-free $500 a year for the next forever. And that's what a solar system is. Get yourselves a solar panel. Right now, we have a federal tax credit for 30%, which means, and then also there's another good thing is this non-profit organization called Sunwork. And I don't get any profit out of that. It's a non-profit organization. The volunteers do the installations. And please, if you have any spare cash that you'd like to invest, and you're going to be in your house for more than 5 years, it's a no-brainer. Get yourself a solar system, and you'll have done a lot of good for this planet because you'll have reduced your own carbon footprint significantly. That's some of the things that Bob McDonald is talking about. Energy efficiency, by the most efficient. I'm going to be changing out all the appliances in my house, which I did in Illinois, with the most efficient appliances. So I went from being 25% less efficient compared to my average neighbor in Illinois to being 25% more efficient. So, drive a Prius, get a plug-in hybrid, or get an electric car. That's a solution to the transportation issue. So do that. All those things you can do in your personal life, and that's the kind of things what we will.
Questions for Hari?
So Hari, let me start with a statement, and then I'll ask you a question. Start out with a few statements. The first one is, I think probably everybody in this room has seen An Inconvenient Truth. So I think we're all very aware of this issue, and you happen to be preaching to a crowd who's active in politics on the, say, the left side.
Yeah.
In California, a state that is arguably farthest ahead of the rest of the country in this.
Yes.
When do you plan to take your message to Oklahoma, where it's 120 degrees in August? They have $500, a month electric bills. Mine's like 100. Like, I don't, I can put solar cells up on my roof, right? I get like no benefit from it because my meter doesn't turn very fast, okay? But over there is where the message needs to be taken. They tend to vote very heavily, 70% blue. They're the ones who are denying that climate change is a problem, right? That's where arguably your message needs to be taken. You shouldn't have moved here where your kids are. You should have been moving there where you have converts. So when do you plan to do that?
I was planning to give up my job and start doing that nationally, but I didn't because I needed to meet my retirement goals so that I could retire. I wanted to do two things: is go around the country and talk about the severity of the problems, the fact that the disasters that were taking place, with the hurricanes or wildfires or droughts, were being caused by climate change. And then the third thing was solutions, and the fact that I was beginning to realize that in the case of solar energy, I could actually be saving myself money on my electric bill. If I have a $500 electric bill, I could get.
Do you have a $500 electric bill here in the Bay Area?
No, I have an $83 bill. But
there you go.
Yeah, but last week.
I mean, you go to Bakersfield, yeah, you might get close to a $500 electric bill.
Yeah,
In the Bay Area,
Nevada,
we're not candidates for that.
Nevada has a very strong solar program, so they have been doing that quite a bit. But the reason why we've gone from 100 degrees to 110 to 120 is they are cooking, and heat waves have been happening.
Of course.
And the poor people in India don't have air conditioners. And they are dying by the hundreds when the heat waves come.
And they have to make a lot of CO2.
Right.
But they all ugly, nasty black smokestacks from their big heavy industries.
Right. But I think what we globally need to do is climate deniers, climate delayers, what I call the Tobacco Institute approach, which is hiring scientists to publish contrary reports. All of that is a problem for us. We need to politically overcome that, and so we need, besides taking back the Senate and the presidency, we need a strong group, a strong momentum, not only to solve climate change for the US, but also help the rest of the world. And we really need to do that. And so I think climate change, we need there's no book that tells us how we're going to get from A to Z. We need a plan, quantitative plan, that's going to make it. And then number two, we need a different type of thing.
Okay. Before you finish with a couple nice poems, we have another question over here.
Okay.
Well, it was more a comment maybe than a question. And the analogy is Hattie and I go to an organic farming conference every January down in Silmar. And people from all over it used to be California, mostly now it's from all over the country. And there's all kinds of really innovative and interesting things going on in Oklahoma and in Kansas and Illinois and all these places. And the thing that I learned from that, listening to those farmers, is if they want to convince their farmer next door that's farming, in a non-organic way, the only way that farmer will be convinced is if he sees a fellow farmer doing better by doing the organic farming. It's not us telling them what to do, it's them, the people on the ground that are doing the right thing and that have interesting ideas telling their peers. And I think that's the piece that really needs to be emphasized. I have no idea how this group would do that, but I think that, in order to reach the kinds of people that I think everyone wants to reach, it needs to be a peer-to-peer conversation with people that, in a community that they trust and that is showing them by example what this could really work and save them money or make them money or make their living environment better. So that's my only comment.
I fully agree with you, Robin. I fully agree with you. I'm an organic farmer myself, a gardener myself. I visited John Jeevons in 1980 when he was doing organic, was a pioneer in organic gardening. I've talked about natural farming and sustainable agriculture. Fukuoka produced a book on natural farming, is Japanese gentleman. Large desert areas would benefit from natural
Yeah, no,
farming.
I'm not talking specifically
But
about
the-
organic farming,
what-
I'm talking about the philosophy of getting peers to talk to peers,
Right.
not people that think they know what's best for somebody to tell them what to do.
I think that is very true. I think that's very true. That is true for solar systems. It's true for sustainable agriculture, and so forth. It's true for our farm areas. I think that could be, and again, when Green Revolution agriculture and agribusiness agriculture was done, agribusiness funded agricultural universities to go out and do extension, to do the R&D for all the new fangled varieties and how new kind of chemical fertilizer would increase yields, and then you go around and tell the farmers and so forth. And this happened not only there, but it happened in the agricultural universities in India, and they taught Green Revolution farming to all the farmers in India, to the detriment of the environment and their incomes, but
Well, that's an example of not peer-to-peer.
Right.
That's an example.
So what I'm saying is-
Basically telling them what to do, and in that case, they bought into it. But these days, farmers